Please, God, fill our ears with your word, but don't stop there. Let your message, your challenge, your comfort, and your hope sink deep into our hearts and our minds. Open us to receive your holy wisdom, your holy word. Amen. The gospel lesson this morning is a retelling by Reverend Jack Carlson, Presbytery of Baltimore. And it comes from the book of Mark, the New Testament, chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. One needs to travel just a few short miles, heading generally to the northwest, before arriving in the seaside towns along the coast. They're inhabited mainly by Gentile folk. And so he thought, speaking of Jesus, to find some refuge there. But his presence was always quickly known. And now he, Jesus, we're talking about, besought by a woman who was by birth Syrophoenician, a Greek, who begs of him to exorcise the vile, unclean spirit which has possessed her young daughter. Anxious, we watch to see how he will deal with such a prayer from one who is outside of the faith. Has she not asked more than can be expected? Indeed, apparently so does it seem to him, saying to her, it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs while the children are still hungry. So speaking, he prepares to move on, but is again arrested by her voice, agitated, begging, now rising in bitter accusation. Yes, Lord, but no one denies the dogs the crumbs that fall from the table. At that, something appears to change upon his countenance, as if an inward change is taking place. We cannot tell for certain, for he does not comment on his thoughts, but says only, because of your words to me, when you go to your home, you shall find your daughter well.
So we've all heard stories of women who were bold enough to break into a male-dominated career path or a particular workplace. I know some of you have likely done that. Trailblazers, we call them. I can't tell you how many times I have been to larger church meetings and been the only woman in the room. Many. One has to have a certain measure of chutzpah. Chutzpah. It's a Yiddish word that originates in Hebrew, and it can mean nerve, gall, audacity, supreme self-confidence, and conspicuous boldness. What about the chutzpah that a woman has who becomes the first woman in her company? What about the chutzpah of Black Americans who are too often the only dark face at an event or a meeting or a workplace? When you're the only woman, the only Black, the only physically disabled person, the only youth, you might feel yourself a need to kind of steel yourself and take a deep breath and gather up a big helping of chutzpah before entering that space. Now, chutzpah can be perceived positively or negatively, of course, depending on which side of the table you sit. The middle-aged man in the gray suit might say to himself about that woman who's now in the office next to him, oh, she's got some chutzpah to come in here and challenge our ways of operating. And then at the same time, that woman's classmates in graduate school are saying about her admiringly, she's got the chutzpah she needs. I recently read an article in the Baltimore Sun that details the extremely negative reactions of some white neighbors in several parts of our city who are clearly upset at the chutzpah of a Black restaurant or bar owner who has set up shop in their neighborhood. They've been calling repeatedly to report bogus noise violations. They've been leaving dog feces on the front step of the establishment. They've been writing ugly, rude notes for those restaurant and bar owners. They're doing anything they can think of to try to intimidate them and harass them with a goal of trying to get them to leave the neighborhood. Unfortunately, some of those restaurant owners who were interviewed are considering relocating. And as I read that article, all I could think of myself was, what in the world? It's 2022. What in the world? Well, I like thinking of chutzpah as conspicuous boldness. That is boldness that you just can't miss. It's so conspicuous and obvious. And if there's anyone in the Gospels who is conspicuously bold, it's the Syrophoenician or Greek woman who stands up to Jesus in Mark chapter 7. She expects him to free her daughter from an unclean spirit. She knows he is able to do that. She believes that he will do that. Yet because of her cultural roots, because of that long-standing breach that exists between Gentiles and Jews, it seems that this poetic rendering of the text, which we heard this morning, it seems like he got it right when he says, has she not asked for more than can be expected in that social milieu? What chutzpah she had to confront Jesus. This bold request for freeing her daughter from being possessed by an unclean spirit ends up changing her daughter's life, and I'm sure the life of that entire family. First, though, Jesus refuses to help her. He refuses her request. But by the end of their conversation, he removes that evil spirit from the child who's not even present, but at home in her bed. This is the only story in the Gospels which shows this kind of about face on Jesus' part. It's also the only place in the Gospels that shows Jesus speaking such a sharp insult towards someone who'd come asking him for help. It seems out of character, doesn't it, with the way we see Jesus portrayed in the rest of the writings? Maybe he was tired that day. It does say that he went to that place for a refuge and a rest. Maybe somebody had just yelled at him. You know, that somebody yells at you and you yell at someone else and then you kick the dog. Or maybe he was just being human, like you and me. Maybe when we see him answer so sharply to her, we can see that he truly lived a human reality like we do. This woman is bold enough to argue with Jesus. That was unusual from the get-go. Some scholars point to the fact that her child was in a bed, like a piece of furniture, not a straw mallet on the floor, signaling some means that that family had to have a piece of furniture for that daughter. They also point to her ability to speak Greek. She's identified as a Greek. Then she was probably well educated and more well off than others in her community. So maybe her social standing gave her kind of a leg to stand on and removed her fear of speaking up, which is often what keeps us from speaking up, is a fear. Maybe she felt she had some power, a little bit of power, because she knew that this one could heal her daughter. And she's not going to take no for an answer. So whether she knows it or not, she's really fitting into the Old Testament pattern of lament. We see it the most in the Psalms. Listen to this plea in Psalm 6. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I'm languishing. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are shaking with terror. Things are not going well for that psalmist. The psalmist is lamenting his situation to God. Or Psalm 38, my heart throbs, my strength fails me. As for the light of my eyes, it's also gone from me. Help. And Psalm 102, hear my prayer, O Lord, let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Incline your ear to me and answer me speedily when I call. Now, those psalmists are making some demands upon God, requests in their laments. So the people of Israel, and probably this woman in her community would have known about this. The people of Israel are very familiar with going to God in a time of trouble, a time of pain or harassment from enemies. We come across that a lot, or distress of any kind. Basically, they're saying, Lord, come and do something about this terrible situation. Or maybe they're saying, Lord, come and do what you promised for your people. This Gentile woman is calling on Jesus to really be Jesus and to do what she knows he's able to do, what he's done in other places, and what her daughter needs so badly. Jesus' words are sharp. In Matthew's version of this story, in chapter 15 of Matthew, he gives her his job description as one of his retorts at not wanting to fulfill her request. He says to her, I have come to save the lost sheep of Israel. Clearly excluding anyone who's outside of Israel, like this woman. But when you stop and think more deeply about it, that was his primary mission. He had interactions with Gentiles. We've read about that. And in all those other cases of those encounters in the Gospels, he willingly met the specific request that they had brought. Sometimes, as we saw last week when we read the account of the woman at the well, Jesus initiated an offer to bring something to that person. But really, the intentional ministry to Gentiles took place after Jesus' resurrection and ascension into heaven. It became the intentional ministry of the disciples or the apostles. It became their work, Peter, Paul, Timothy, Barnabas, and more, to go out into the world and share this gospel message. But Jesus, in his ministry, had to create kind of like what you might call a base in order which to build out from. In order to get this world-changing bit of good news out beyond. That news that the door to God's kingdom was wide open. That news that the crack in the relationship between God and humans could indeed be repaired by following this brown-skinned radical preacher with a name that means save. Now, calling the woman a dog was definitely an insult. That's still an insult today when we do that. In that time, it was an ethnic religious insult. There's no getting around that. But she doesn't argue about that point. She doesn't say, I'm not a dog. She could have. But she kind of accepts that second-class citizenship between those who are not Jewish with those who are Jews. Not something I would recommend for anyone to accept second-class citizenship, but maybe that was part of her strategy, you see. She does that so she can move on to the point she really wants to make. Her point is, she and her daughter are deserving at least of the leftover crumbs from the master's or the Lord's table. And indeed, they are deserving. Jesus recognizes the truth in her conspicuously bold retort. And Jesus changes his mind. Had he not been bold enough to push back, nothing would have changed for her. She would have meekly gone back home to her daughter with the unclean spirit, tail between her legs. No change in her household. She was conspicuously bold in her conversation with Jesus, asking for what she needed. Now, you might say that the recipients of our denomination's self-development of people grants are conspicuously bold in their ask for grant monies to enable healing in their communities, to close the opportunity gaps, to create ways to repair the breach and be restorers of livable streets, as Isaiah the prophet said. Self-development of people is one of 3 parts of our annual One Great Hour of Sharing offering. I hope that sounds familiar. The One Great Hour of Sharing offering is the offering that Presbyterians around the country share in, and it's really the largest opportunity for Presbyterians to gather together and make change in the world for better. We'll collect it again this year on Easter Sunday. It's interesting to me that the focus for this year for that offering is You shall be called repairers of the breach. You shall be called repairers of the breach. Any self-development of people grant must be just that, self-development. It must be a request that comes directly from the community which is experiencing the oppression, poverty, or injustice of some kind. It can't be a request from some rich Presbyterian congregation on behalf of that community. That's not self-development. That's someone else trying to do for you. These grants go to national and international partners. Last year's grants went to a grassroots organizations like Cultivate South Park in Seattle, Washington. Cultivate South Park is a low-income group of artists, community organizers, activists, and youth who are creating a community space in South Park, a part of Seattle. And it's a part of Seattle that's almost 1/3 Hispanic in population. Cultivate South Park is going to use the funds that they've been granted by the Self-Development of People program to conduct classes and activities for youth who need connection and healing. To develop further a farmer's market right in that community. To expand their neighborhood dinner program that goes once a week for anyone who's hungry. And for them to work together on other kinds of projects that pull them together as a neighborhood. They are repairing the breach that our society has created for those who have few economic resources and little political power. They're using their conspicuously bold voices to bring about change in their lives and in their community. Like that Gentile woman who argued with Jesus, conspicuously bold to bring about change. Now, surely conspicuous boldness is needed on the part of those who are at the fringes in order to get the message across to those who hold the power. But repair work can never be only one-sided. If you've got a crack in your wall, you need to repair it from both sides. Conspicuous boldness, you see, is also needed on the part of those who already hold the power. They have the power to speak out against injustice, to seek to level the playing field in education or the workplace, or in purchasing of homes, or in the ability to build generational wealth. How conspicuously bold would it be if those in power relinquished some of that power so that it indeed could be shared? How bold indeed that would be. Amen.
When you give to Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church, you provide the mechanism for so many gifts to be shared. You buy the plants so gardening disciples can garden. You buy the shop vac so building disciples can get the water up. You buy the computer so the fiduciary disciples can keep track of our giving and our spending. You buy the music license so our singing disciples can try new music. You make it possible for serving disciples to use their gifts. Thank you for your ongoing support of our ministry together.